Hi, welcome back to the Petersen Automotive Museum YouTube channel. I'm Jonee Eisen, Associate Curator here at the museum, and today we're going to look at two unusual American cars from the middle of the 20th century that came from a couple of guys who started out building things that weren't cars. So this is the Eshelman adult sports car, and it is what I believe to be the smallest automobile ever manufactured in the United States. And yes, it is a real car, although it doesn't look like one. It's called an adult sports car, so it is a car for adults, even though it looks like a toy. And this car was the brainchild of a man named Cheston Lee Eshelman, who was an entrepreneur from the mid-20th century, who hit upon a very inexpensive way of producing products. Was casting steel, which he used to make a whole host of things, including funny-looking tiny little cars. So Cheston Lee Eshelman was a real character, and he first came on the scene in a very funny way. In 1939, he spent 6 hours learning how to fly, went to rent an airplane, and promptly crashed it in the Atlantic Ocean outside of Boston. When he was picked up by the police, he told them that he was trying to fly to Mars. He had 55 cents in his pocket, a pistol, and I think a sandwich. That was probably a made-up story. I don't think he actually believed he could fly a plane to Mars, but it made a little bit of an impact in the papers, and everybody for a brief period of time knew the name of Cheston Lee Eshelman. Now, Eshelman was obsessed with making unusual designs for airplanes. He had seen the flying wing and thought that he could make a smaller version of it. He designed a plane called the Flying Flounder, at least that was its nickname. It was an ovoid-shaped wingless aircraft that actually did fly. He tried to sell this to the United States Air Force. They were not interested whatsoever, and this was kind of a failed enterprise. And after World War II, he would move on to manufacturing other products. So Cheston Eshelman was a pretty keen entrepreneur. He came up with a whole host of get-rich-quick schemes for manufacturing cheap stuff. One thing he did right after World War II was buy a bunch of fuel tanks from the Air Force, which he converted into boats that he then put a big conical shape at the front of them and called them the Eshelman rocket boat. And it was indeed a boat that looked like a sci-fi rocket ship. They looked really cool, and apparently he only sold about 5 of them, but he advertised them for sale in his catalogs for many years after he built the first 5. He also realized that there was a growing market for garden tools and garden implements and things like lawnmowers. With the migration of the middle class from the cities to the suburbs after the Second World War in the 1950s, there was definitely a need for people at home to be able to take care of their own lawns and gardens, and gardening was a kind of a fad in the 1950s. Cheston realized that cast steel was a very inexpensive, quick way of making things like tractors and lawnmowers, and he started offering a whole line of products. He built scooters. One of his most popular products was a very cheap garden tractor. And one day he hit upon the idea of, what if I take the body of the tractor and shape it more like a car and sell it as a kid's toy? And so his first car was actually the child sports car, which had a 2-horsepower Briggs & Stratton engine out of the tractor. It had a pull start, and it proved pretty popular. Kids, in suburbs would drive these things around. Now, they're made of cast steel, so they're not particularly light. So Cheston thought, since these were pretty popular with kids, he could probably sell them to adults. And he decided to build a slightly bigger version of the child sports car, put a slightly bigger engine in it, 3 horsepower instead of 2, and call it the adult sports car. It first only fit 1 person, and he started advertising these in the backs of magazines, sporting magazines and craft magazines, with a little tiny ad with a little drawing, and he called it the adult sports car. And I guess people saw the words sports car and adult, and they thought that, hey, I could get a real car here for about $400, and orders flooded in. Of course, when it arrived in a crate at your house, it looked like this, and people were kind of shocked and disappointed. He then started making them a little bigger. Now they could seat 2. The horsepower was increased to 6 and even 8.5. Eshelman advertised it as great for running errands. He thought it could be a golf cart. You could get an attachment for it to put a couple golf bags in the back. It is obviously as primitive as it looks. Brakes are friction pads that stop by pressing against the tires themselves. Starter is a pull start like on a lawnmower, and to shut it off you have to reach through the dash, feel around the now hot engine to find the shut-off switch to turn the thing off. It has a top speed of around 30 miles an hour, although I think you'd have to be out of your mind to drive this on the street at 30 miles an hour. They were, I guess, popular enough that they kept the Eshelman business going for a while. In 1957, actually, Eshelman's factory burned down. When he restarted production, he pretty much decided not to make the garden tools anymore and just made these. So apparently he was selling enough to suckers everywhere to keep the business going. So after selling these for a few years, Cheston did try to sell an almost full-size car. He came out with one called the Sportsman, which had a microcar-sized body, but it was bigger than this and actually had a roof, big tail fins. Again, he was using cast steel, so all the body panels were pretty much flat and very basic. It's really one of the weirdest, most awkward-looking cars ever made. Some would call it pretty ugly, actually. And I think he made about a dozen of them before he moved on to a very strange project. He came out with a car called the Eshelman Golden Eagle, which was actually a Chevrolet Corvair that he put a big golden eagle on the front and a bunch of other, he just sort of stuck a bunch of gold doodads on the car and stopped calling it a Chevrolet and called it the Eshelman Golden Eagle. He did sell a few of these before GM shut them down, saying that you can't just stick a bunch of stuff on our car and call it your car. He came out with a bunch of other harebrained ideas in the 60s and 70s. An amphibious car with a rollback canopy he had a design for that he patented. He came out with an idea of using your spare tire as a front bumper. He moved to Florida and tried for many years to sell this to car companies, but Eshelman's idea was really weird and stuck out way in front of the car, and nobody wanted it. Eshelman died in Florida at the age of 87 in the mid-2000s, leaving a legacy of very entertaining products and automobiles. While it didn't revolutionize the auto industry in any way, shape, or form, they're really fun and whimsical, and I think they'll put a smile on everybody's face. So now we're going to look at the 1947 Crosley Pickup. Crosley was a much more legitimate attempt to sell small, inexpensive cars to Americans around World War II, and they were the invention of Pal Crosley, a man who was a great entrepreneur who actually was very innovative. And came out with a really bunch of very interesting products, not just in the automobile world, but also in appliances, radios, and was a major figure in American manufacturing in the middle of the 20th century. So Pal Crosley, at the turn of the century, when he was just a child, became fascinated and obsessed, really, with the new automobile industry that was growing here in the United States. Cars were a totally new form of transportation that really captured Americans' imagination. And Crosley, really right from the start, knew that they needed to be available to everybody. So in the mid-1930s, Pal Crosley decided he would go back to trying to build an automobile. His philosophy was to make something that anyone could afford. And in 1936, he approached his brother. He said, let's start a car company and build little, tiny, affordable cars. A car so cheap that anybody who wanted a car could buy it. In 1939, at a ceremony at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, Crosley presented the 1A, a good name for your first car, a little tiny car powered by a two-cylinder engine that was priced at $325, indeed an amount that was affordable to pretty much anybody who wanted a car. The only other car that it competed with was the American Bantam, which I think cost about $25 to $50 more, so Crosley was officially the cheapest car in America. It was obviously very slow. It was very primitive. It didn't offer very many accoutrements, but it was cheap, and it would, get you down the street, get you into town to buy groceries. Crosley improved the car somewhat. The price increased to about $450 by the beginning of the Second World War, and the Crosley Motor Company sold about 5,700 of these before production stopped with the start of the Second World War. So before production stopped, Crosley offered several other body styles, including a very small pickup, which was somewhat popular with farmers and other tradesmen who needed something kind of practical and not something big. Most trucks at the time were fairly large, and this was a thrifty way of bringing, hay around your farm or bringing your produce to market. The two-cylinder engine was extremely thrifty. It was a cheap car to buy, a cheap car to run. During the war, Crosley shifted production to war products. I know they built proximity sensors for a variety of things, and then went back to building cars right after the Second World War. So this truck is from 1947. By this time, Crosley was making not just sedans, but station wagons, coupes, a tiny little sports car called the Hot Shot, a little Jeep-like thing that could be driven on the farm or on the road. And Crosley knew that it would take a while for the American economy to recover after World War II, so he thought there would be a pretty healthy market for an inexpensive car. He revised the design to what we see here. It obviously is a somewhat unorthodox design. To some people's eyes, it's cute. To other people's eyes, it's just kind of awkward. So when Crosley production picked up after the Second World War, Powell knew that he needed to offer something with a little bit better capabilities than the two-cylinder engine that were in the pre-war Crosleys. He knew that for a small car, lightness was important, obviously, and he came up with a very innovative way of building an engine. He used stamped sheet metal, brazed together using copper, instead of a cast engine. This made for an extremely lightweight motor. And this engine, which he called the Cobra engine for copper-brazed, only weighed 133 pounds. It was really one of the lightest automobile engines available. Everything was going fine until certain drawbacks to this process of building an engine, brazing instead of casting, came to light. The engine was very much prone to corrosion. They came up with a new cast engine, which only weighed about 60 pounds more than the Cobra engine, and cars from 1947 onwards received this engine, and a lot of early cars had their engines replaced. So Crosleys were available in a host of body styles: coupes, sedans, convertibles, station wagons, which of course was the most popular Crosley. I think more than half of Crosley sold were station wagons. They were practical. They were great for getting groceries. But the most famous Crosley was the sports car, the Hot Shot, a little two-seat roadster with a 26.5 horsepower engine. So the Hot Shot actually sold pretty well and were a common sight on amateur racetracks, especially out here in California. By the very end of the 1940s and the early 1950s, Crosley was selling 15,000 cars a year. The cars were now powered by a four-cylinder engine. It was making around 27 horsepower. They were slow. They weren't the most comfortable things, but really for what you got for around $500, it wasn't bad. We can see that the car actually came with a radio. This was one of the first cars that a radio was standard in. You get, a whole number of gauges here. You have obviously a speedometer, but you have a battery gauge, you have a fuel gauge, temperature gauge, oil gauge, really everything you need, to run your car. You have a manual choke. It's a little cramped, obviously, but I'm 6 feet tall, and I think I just fit. It would be a little bit uncomfortable to drive, but not terrible. Cost, obviously, was one of the biggest factors when designing a Crosley. And we can see that with the windows, which are very simple sliding windows. They didn't require the mechanism to make it roll up and down. The window didn't need to disappear into the door. It made building the door very simple and cheap. The steering wheel, obviously very basic. This was a steering wheel that I think was an off-the-shelf product that you could get for a whole number of cars. Probably tractors too use them. There's a cute little button here for the horn. The horn makes a great sound, actually. You got a heater down there, obviously no air conditioning. It's a cramped cabin, but it's not completely uncomfortable in here. So it's a small car, which means it has probably the smallest glove compartment I've ever seen. There you go. You really could just fit a pair of gloves in there. Crosley had a widely recognized advertising campaign. These cars were sold from coast to coast, and there were Crosley dealerships everywhere. So one of my favorite details on the Crosley is the badge right here at the nose. It's got this cute little reflector. It looks like something you'd see on a bicycle. And then beneath the Crosley name, you have their slogan, a fine car. Unfortunately, you know, well, fortunately for America, but probably unfortunately for Mr. Crosley, as the 1950s went on, the economy improved. People didn't really need a car like this. Cars were much more capable. You started getting cars with big fins, lots of chrome, and they were really attractive. And the awkward little Crosley no longer had people that loved it. And by the mid-1950s, production shut down. So that's the story of two of the smallest cars ever made in America, the Eshelman and the Crosley. Thanks for watching. When you're in LA, come and visit us here at the Petersen Automotive Museum.